The truth is finally on the table, and no one can deny it anymore. The same community that once laughed at you is now scrambling to cover up the very chaos you tried to warn them about. What's happening right now isn't just uncomfortable, it's a full-blown collapse of illusions. And whether they like it or not, your silence is louder than their excuses. They can't escape it, they can't spin it. Everything you said would happen is unfolding right in front of their eyes. You see, the scariest part about being right isn't the moment you speak the truth. It's the moment everyone else realizes they ignored it. And chosen ones, that moment is here. You're living in the aftermath of a storm you saw coming long before anyone else could smell the rain. While they partied under fake blue skies, you noticed the cracks in the clouds. And now the downpour has washed away their facades. The community is shook, not because the storm arrived, but because you were the one who saw it first. They thought you were exaggerating. They thought you were overanalyzing. Some even accused you of stirring up drama for no reason. But now, the betrayal, the lies, the secret dealings, they're no longer whispers in the dark. They're headlines. Their rumors turned to facts. Their messes too big to sweep under any rug. And the very people who mocked your warnings are now choking on the dust of their own denial. Before I go deeper, let me pause for a second. If you're here, it's not by accident. You're part of this movement, this circle of awareness, and I want to thank you for carrying this light. If this message hits home for you already, press that like button and subscribe. It's one way of making sure this truth spreads wider. Think of it as planting a flag in the ground that says, "We see what's happening and we're not afraid to say it out loud." Now let's get back to what's unfolding. Right now, psychology has a word for what they're experiencing: cognitive dissonance. It's when the truth stares someone in the face, but it doesn't match the lie they've been clinging to, so their mind freezes. They get stuck between two worlds, the fantasy they built and the reality crashing in. That's where your enemies are living now, trapped, restless, haunted. They smile in public, but behind closed doors they're pacing the floors at 3 a.m. They've got Google tabs open with desperate searches like "How to undo bad karma" or "Why do I feel like I'm being exposed?" And the irony. They once mocked you for even believing in consequences. They thought they could play dirty forever, that their masks would never slip, that their secrets would stay buried. But the universe has a way of dragging hidden things into the light. And when it does, the ones who ignored your warnings don't just feel embarrassed, they feel hunted by the very truth they tried to bury. Think about history for a moment. Every time a whistleblower, a reformer, or a visionary spoke up, the crowd laughed first. They laughed at Galileo when he said the earth moved. They laughed at inventors who said flight was possible. They laughed at survivors who warned about corruption before it came out. But who had the last word? The ones who stood firm in truth. And that's exactly where you stand now, on the edge of vindication. Chosen ones, this isn't just about people admitting you were right. This is about them realizing that your clarity pierced through their illusions. You didn't just guess an outcome, you revealed a whole ecosystem of dysfunction, an entire culture built on lies. And that's why they're not just unsettled, they're shook. They're terrified because they know that if you were right about this, you might be right about things they haven't even dared to admit to themselves yet. Your silence now speaks volumes. You don't have to argue. You don't have to remind anyone of what you said. All you have to do is exist, and their guilt eats them alive. That's the real power, your quiet truth shaking their noisy denial. It's like standing on a battlefield after the smoke clears. The enemies are injured, confused, and suddenly aware that they were fighting a war they could never win. Some of them will keep pretending, of course. They'll put on smiles, share fake motivational quotes, and pretend their world hasn't cracked. But behind those walls, they're falling apart. They're making secret phone calls. They're drafting fake apologies they'll never send. They're gossiping even more because silence terrifies them. They're unraveling because what you warned them about has come true, and now there's no one left to blame but themselves. This is your vindication season. You're not imagining it. The shift is real. The very community that once dismissed you is now looking around nervously, wondering who else noticed the storm, wondering how much more you knew that you haven't yet revealed. And the truth is, you don't even have to reveal it. Time itself is doing the work for you. Their lies are collapsing under their own weight. Chosen one, let this sink in. You don't need revenge. You don't need to gloat. Your strength is in your quiet knowing. While they scramble, you stand steady. While they tremble, you breathe calmly, because you always knew the universe doesn't miss a thing, and now everyone else knows it too. And chosen one, I'm talking directly to you right now. Can you feel the shift in the air? The whole community is shook, not because the storm came, but because you stood in truth when no one else dared. That's why you need to lean in and stay with me. What's about to unfold in this message isn't random. It's the exact blueprint of how everything you warned them about is finally coming to the surface. If you've ever felt ignored, laughed at, or called crazy, this is your moment of vindication, and you won't want to miss a single word. So here's what I want you to do. Pause for 1 second, press that like button, and subscribe right now. That's not just for me. It's how you send a message back to the universe that says, I'm standing in my power, and I'm ready for more. And while you're here, drop a comment with the number 777 if you can feel that confirmation buzzing in your chest. Because what comes next, it's going to cut deeper, hit harder, and remind you why their fear is the proof of your strength. Now let's dive into it, step by step. Number 1, they called you crazy, but you were the only one seeing clearly. Sometimes the greatest punishment for a liar isn't exposure. It's living long enough to watch the truth they denied swallow them whole. That's where your enemies are now. They once called you paranoid, dramatic, negative. But here's the reality. You weren't paranoid, you were perceiving. You weren't trembling in fear, you were tuned into signals the rest of them were too blind, too comfortable, or too dishonest to admit existed. You caught the scent of the fire long before the smoke was visible, and while they laughed at your warnings, you were quietly preparing for the blaze they're now trapped inside. They tried to gaslight you because that's the oldest trick in the book. You're imagining it, you're overthinking, you're too deep. Does that sound familiar? They couldn't fight the facts you saw, so they attacked your perception. And you, chosen one, started to doubt yourself for a moment, wondering if maybe they were right. But you weren't wrong. You were early. The truth always shows up late to the party, but when it arrives, it clears the room. Look at what's happening now. The same people who rolled their eyes at you are now pacing their floors at 3 a.m., whispering prayers they once mocked, searching how to undo bad karma under fake usernames. Your gut was never your enemy, it was your compass. You didn't need physical evidence at the time because your spirit had already filed the report. That's not paranoia, that's intelligence, that's discernment. That's your internal radar doing what theirs couldn't. And you know what's ironic? The same ones who accused you of being too sensitive are now choking on the very reality you tried to warn them about. They're not just embarrassed, they're terrified. Because if you are right about this, what else might you be right about that they haven't even begun to face? This is what happens when someone perceives the shift before it breaks the surface. You felt the betrayal before the confession. You sensed the lies before the admission. You read the room when no one else could. That's a gift, not a curse. They called it delusion because they couldn't handle the truth, not because you were wrong. Now, the invisible has become visible. The quiet tension you noticed, it's erupting. The strange energy in the room you pointed out, everyone feels it now, but too late. Think about it like a storm. Most people only acknowledge it when the clouds turn black. But you, chosen one, smelled the rain in the wind before the sky even shifted. You were being extra only because you were being early. And what did you do with that time? You didn't run around causing chaos. You didn't gossip. You didn't gloat. You prepared. While they were partying in denial, you were building your peace. While they gambled with their futures, you steadied your soul. You were getting your house in order because you knew what was coming, even if you couldn't explain how. And now look at the contrast. While they're spiraling, you're steady. While they're scrambling for cover, you're grounded. That's not luck. That's the reward of trusting your perception. And yet, here's the question you might be asking right now. Why does it still hurt? Why doesn't it feel like victory? Because being right often feels lonely. Vindication isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent. But don't mistake that silence for emptiness. It's power. Your silence is screaming now, and they hear it even if you never speak a word. You don't need revenge. You already have it. It's called being proven right in a world that swore you were wrong. That's the kind of revenge that doesn't fade. It sticks. It makes them look over their shoulder every time a new truth comes to light, wondering if you knew about this one too. They're not just uncomfortable, they're shook because they can't predict how much more you've already seen. That's why they're gossiping harder, deflecting louder, and pretending even more. Their performance is their confession. This is your moment to understand something crucial. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're equipped. You were given a sharper lens for a reason. And yes, it's painful to be the one who sees clearly in a world built on illusions. But it's also liberating. It means you're not caught off guard when the masks slip. It means you're free from the trap they're now stuck in. You might even feel anger rising, anger at being mocked, dismissed, labeled the problem for speaking the truth. That anger is valid, but let it transform into fuel, not fire. Because here's the real power move. You don't even have to say, "I told you so." Your peace says it for you. Your stability says it for you. The calm way you're moving through this chaos is louder than any accusation you could make. Do you see what's happening? Their attempts to silence you became their own silence. Their attempts to discredit you became their own discredit. You don't need to chase them down with evidence. Reality itself is doing the chasing. Every secret they tried to hide is surfacing on its own. Every lie they built their status on is crumbling without you lifting a finger. That's not just karma. That's the natural consequence of living in denial when the truth is standing right in front of you. And here's another question you might have. What now? How do I handle this power? The answer is simple. Stay steady. Don't get pulled into their chaos. Don't lower yourself to their games. Your discernment is your crown. Wear it, but don't weaponize it. The universe is already handling the scoreboard. You just keep walking forward, eyes open, shoulders back. That's how you win. Because while they're drowning in the flood they refuse to believe was coming, you're already on higher ground. And you didn't get there by accident. You got there by trusting what you felt when everyone else said you were wrong. They called you crazy, but you were the only one seeing clearly. And now they have to live in the world they created. The same world you escaped by believing yourself. Number 2. The silence that haunts louder than their denial. First, they laugh at you, then they fight you, then they copy you, then they pretend you never existed. That's the cycle of truth. And chosen one, you are standing right in the middle of it. When you first opened your mouth, they acted like your words were poison. They rolled their eyes, smirked, and whispered behind your back. They didn't reject you because you were wrong. They rejected you because the truth you carried was too sharp for their fragile comfort. Think about it. Truth doesn't thrive in crowds. Crowds want entertainment, not exposure. Crowds want the illusion, not the interruption. That's why when you spoke, it wasn't received as wisdom. It was treated like contamination. You weren't the virus, you were the cure. But in a room full of addicts clinging to their illusions, the cure feels like poison. They needed you to shut up so they could keep feeding themselves the lies they had built their lives on. Here's a hard fact. The truth is allergic to crowds, but contagious in silence. They couldn't tolerate it when you said it out loud, but now your silence is echoing louder than their noise. They can't stop replaying your words in their heads. The conversations they once brushed off, the warnings they once mocked, they're hearing them again like a haunting. That's why they can't look you in the eye. Because now they remember everything you said. Imagine this. You once stood in a room full of people laughing at you for suggesting there was a leak in the boat. They mocked you, toasted to their good fortune, and told you to stop being negative. And now, that same boat is sinking, and they're looking around for lifeboats that don't exist. Who do you think they're remembering now? The one they laughed at. The one they called dramatic, the one they told to shut up. Or imagine another scene. You warned them about the cracks in the foundation. They told you to relax, said you were too critical, but now the walls are splitting and the floor beneath them is trembling. The silence you're holding now? It's the loudest "I told you so" the universe could ever deliver. You don't have to lift a finger. The cracks are speaking for you. That's what's shaking them. It's not just that you were right, it's that you're no longer trying to prove it. You're not campaigning for validation. You're not defending yourself. You're not chasing their approval. You've gone quiet, and that silence terrifies them more than your words ever did. Why? Because silence forces people to think. And your silence is forcing them to face what they've been running from. Truth doesn't shout, it waits. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't argue. It confirms. That's the season you're in right now. Your truth doesn't need a crowd, it just needs time. And time has caught up to them. Maybe you've wondered, why didn't they listen when I tried to help? Why didn't they take me seriously? The answer is simple. They couldn't afford to. If you were right, their entire world would crumble. Their relationships, their status, their identities, they all depended on the lie. It was easier to label you bitter, dramatic, or doing too much than it was to face their own denial. They needed you to be wrong, because your truth was the wrecking ball aimed at the home they built on sand. But denial only works until reality breaks the door down, and that's what's happening now. The silence is becoming contagious. People who once mocked you are now whispering behind closed doors. They're replaying your conversations, connecting dots they refused to see before. They're watching the collapse of everything they tried to protect. And it's dawning on them, you were never the problem. Their fear of truth was. Silence is not empty, it's full of answers. That's what they're learning. Every time you don't speak, it leaves them alone with their own thoughts. And those thoughts are ruthless. They're starting to recall every warning you gave, every gut feeling you had, every uncomfortable truth you placed in front of them. They don't remember the gossip or the noise anymore. They remember your voice, and that memory is their punishment. Imagine this too. Silence is like an unfinished song stuck in someone's head. It loops, it repeats, it nags. They're haunted by your melody because you never gave them closure. You never retracted your words, never apologized for your insight, never begged them to see you differently. You left it hanging, and now they're forced to hum along to a song they once swore didn't exist. And here's the most brutal irony. The silence that once made them feel powerful now makes them feel powerless. They thought shutting you down, ignoring you, or outnumbering you gave them control. But the truth doesn't disappear when ignored. It multiplies in the shadows. It spreads quietly, like fire under the floorboards, until it bursts through where everyone can see it. That's what's happening right now. The silence you've kept has been contagious. It's infecting their minds, infecting their conversations, infecting their peace. Now they whisper the very things they once shouted against. They repeat your words as if they thought of them first. They act like they've just discovered what you've always known. And isn't that the final proof? The same voices that tried to bury you are now resurrecting your truth in secret. They don't give you credit, but deep down, they know where it came from. They know you said it first. They know you carried it when it was unpopular. And that knowledge is what eats them alive. Truth doesn't need defenders. It just needs survivors. And chosen one, you survived. You made it through the mockery, the rejection, the loneliness of being right too early. And now the community is shook because everything you warned about is unfolding. Not because you shouted louder, but because you stayed quiet when the noise no longer deserved your energy. That silence is your crown. It's your proof. It's your victory. So don't second-guess yourself now. Don't wonder if you should have fought harder to be believed. You were never supposed to convince them. You were supposed to speak it and then let time confirm it. And that's exactly what's happening. Your silence is now their teacher. Your silence is now their reminder. And your silence will remain their haunting until they finally admit the truth to themselves. And when they do, remember this: you don't need an apology. You don't need validation. You don't need the crowd to clap, because the truth never needed the crowd. It just needed you to hold it. And you did. Number 3, they didn't forget you. They exiled you because truth made you untouchable. Exile isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's a strategy by the weak to contain the strong. That's exactly what happened to you, chosen one. Your exile was never random, never accidental. They didn't forget to call you, didn't overlook you by mistake, and didn't leave you out because of chance. No, your removal was organized. It was deliberate. The moment your words pierced their illusions, you became too dangerous to keep around. You weren't safe for their system anymore. And what system was that? A fragile arrangement built on silence, fake smiles, unspoken agreements, and a so-called peace that only worked if no one dared question it. The second you opened your mouth, you disrupted their foundation. And because they couldn't shut down what you were saying, they tried to shut you down instead. That's why the whispers started. That's why the subtle shade, the fake pity, the smear campaigns came out of nowhere. It wasn't confusion, it was strategy. They couldn't erase your accuracy, so they painted you as the problem. Isn't it funny? The one carrying truth becomes the scapegoat, while the real dysfunction hides in plain sight. Imagine this: a community sitting in a theater, all pretending the stage is flawless. You're the one who notices the cracks in the set, the wires showing, the actors slipping. Instead of thanking you, they drag you out of the audience. Why? Because your eyes exposed what they were desperate to ignore. You weren't just watching the play, you were breaking the illusion. And here's the part they never expected. Exile didn't silence you, it spotlighted you. Because now, as everything you warned about unfolds, your absence screams louder than your presence ever could. The betrayals are surfacing. The secret deals are unraveling. The very faces they swore were pure are being exposed. And the people who plotted your removal, they're shook, because truth has a memory, and it's replaying every word you spoke. So don't think you were cast out because you didn't belong. The truth is harsher. You belonged too much. Your clarity was too sharp, your presence too disruptive, your insight too undeniable. They didn't exile you because you were wrong. They exiled you because you were right. And now that reality is proving it, they can't escape what they tried to bury. Number 4, they asked for rescue, but rejected it when it didn't come, gift-wrapped. People rarely reject the truth. They reject the package it's delivered in. That's the irony of your story, chosen one. You weren't a coincidence. You were the answer long before they even understood the question. They begged for signs. They cried out for clarity, for protection, for the masks of their enemies to finally slip. They wanted cycles broken, betrayals exposed, and truth revealed. And when the universe answered, it didn't send thunder from the sky. It sent you. Not with robes, halos, or soft voices, but raw, unfiltered, and undeniably human. But here's the problem. They didn't recognize you. They were expecting comfort, not confrontation. They wanted the truth to whisper, not to cut. And when you showed up sharp, unapologetic, unwilling to shrink just to make them comfortable, they panicked. You weren't there to play along with dysfunction. You weren't there to soothe illusions. You came with eyes that saw too much and a voice that sliced through excuses. That terrified them. So instead of welcoming the answer they claimed to want, they rejected it. Imagine this, someone drowning, screaming for help, but when the lifeboat arrives, they complain about its color and push it away. That's what they did to you. They mistook the very thing they needed most for the threat they feared. And now, the same cycles you tried to interrupt are exploding in front of them. The faces you exposed are showing their true masks. The betrayals you warned about are no longer whispers, they're undeniable. And the bitter realization is this: their prayer was answered. It just wasn't packaged in the soft, easy-to-digest wrapping they imagined. Here's the question you might be asking: why didn't they see me for what I was? Because answers rarely look the way people expect. They thought deliverance would be gentle, but deliverance often comes as disruption. They thought clarity would comfort, but clarity confronts. And when they pushed you away, they weren't protecting themselves, they were blocking their own healing. Now the irony is searing them. They sent their rescue away only to watch the storm consume everything they were desperate to save. And deep down, they know you were never the problem. You were the answer. Number 5, you weren't the chaos. You were the siren they tried to mute. Truth doesn't create the fire. It rings the alarm before the flames break through. That was you. You weren't chaos. You were the warning signal walking among them. Long before the destruction showed up, your very presence shifted the atmosphere. You didn't come with flashing lights or sirens, but your energy, your silence, your piercing questions all carried the same message: something is wrong here. But here's the twist. They mistook you for the problem. Instead of seeing you as the alarm, they treated you like the chaos itself. They told themselves you were overreacting, that you were too sensitive, too suspicious, too quick to call things out. Why? Because your clarity unsettled the comfort of their denial. You weren't stirring trouble. You were exposing the trouble already simmering beneath the surface. Imagine being in a building where the smoke detector goes off. Instead of checking for fire, the people rip the batteries out of the alarm so they can sleep in peace. That's exactly what they did with you. They ignored your signals, hit snooze on your warnings, and chose the illusion over the interruption. But illusions don't save lives. Alarms do. You were awake while they were sedated. You were alert while they were numb. They expected chaos to arrive with explosions, but it came quietly, through your intuition, your unease, your refusal to play along with dysfunction. That's why they couldn't stand you. Your very presence was proof that something wasn't right. And now, the fire you sensed is at their front door. The betrayals are burning through their circles. The secrets are falling out like bricks. The consequences are collapsing. The foundations they swore were unshakable. And suddenly they're asking, why didn't anyone say something? But someone did. You did. Here's the irony. They silenced the one voice that could have spared them this fallout. They shut down the very siren that was trying to save them, not because you were wrong, but because your warning came from someone they underestimated. Someone they didn't want to admit was right. And now every consequence reminds them of you, the alarm they ignored, the voice they silenced, the signal they can never erase. Number 6. They weren't blind, they were willing accomplices to the lie. Cowardice is never ignorance. It's a choice to see and still pretend you don't. That's what the community was guilty of. They weren't clueless, chosen one. They weren't in the dark. They saw the shifts, heard the whispers, felt the tension in the air the same way you did. But instead of confronting it, they folded their arms and looked the other way. Why? Because truth demands sacrifice, and they weren't willing to risk their seat at the table. Imagine a room filling with smoke. Everyone smells it, everyone coughs, everyone glances around nervously. But instead of leaving, they keep laughing at the party, hoping no one notices the fire spreading in the walls. You were the one who shouted, "Something's wrong here," and that didn't just expose the fire, it exposed their loyalty to pretending everything was fine. They weren't confused, they were complicit. Your courage was their mirror. The second you stood up, their silence became evidence. It wasn't neutrality, it was agreement. They saw the darkness and chose tribe over truth. They chose comfort over conviction. And when the system turned on you, they let it happen. Not because you were wrong, but because they didn't want to wear the same target. Think about that. They smiled at you in public, but abandoned you in spirit. They left you carrying the weight of truth alone, while they blended in with the very dysfunction destroying them. That's not confusion. That's betrayal, dressed in quiet compliance. Now, the storm has arrived. The masks are off. The leaders they defended are exposed. The peace they thought silence would preserve has collapsed into chaos. And the herd they clung to, it's stampeding straight into disaster. Here's the irony. You weren't the danger. You were the siren. You weren't the threat. You were the only lifeline. But they chose denial over disruption. And now, as the fallout spreads, they're drowning in the very silence they worshipped. Meanwhile, the one they exiled, the one they tried to bury, is standing dry on the shore, holding the same truth they were too afraid to carry. And now they're realizing complicity costs more than courage ever could. Number 7. You weren't the wrecking ball. You were the light that showed the cracks. People don't hate the truth for what it is. They hate it for what it exposes in them. That's exactly why you became dangerous. You didn't just speak truth, you shattered the illusion that kept the community glued together. Theirs was a stage play, a carefully scripted performance where everyone knew their part. Fake smiles, polite nods, silence when it mattered most. It wasn't unity, it was theater. And the moment you stepped on stage, the script fell apart. You asked the questions no one wanted to answer. You pointed out the behaviors everyone had normalized. You refused to play along with dysfunction just to keep the peace. And in doing so, you revealed something terrifying for them. That their peace wasn't peace at all. It was a fragile agreement to protect lies. Your clarity wasn't chaos, it was a mirror. You didn't break the community. They were already cracked. You just refused to paint over the fractures, and that's why they turned on you. They didn't hate you, they hated what your presence revealed about themselves. Your authenticity made their hypocrisy impossible to ignore. Your courage made their cowardice obvious. Your integrity turned their silence into evidence. Imagine this: a house built on sand. Everyone inside decorates the walls, throws parties, pretends it's solid. You walk in and say, "This won't stand." Suddenly, you're the enemy, not because you lied, but because you told the truth too early. They whispered about you. They labeled you difficult, divisive, too much. But deep down, they knew it wasn't destruction you brought. It was revelation, and that scared them more than any fire, because revelation spreads. It's contagious. Once one person wakes up, others start questioning too. That's what they feared most. Now the illusion has collapsed. The masks are slipping, the secrets leaking, the buried tension erupting, and what stands in the rubble is proof. You weren't the wrecking ball, they were. You were just the light that showed the cracks. And here's the irony: the same truth they tried to bury is the only thing that could have saved them. But they silenced the revealer and worshipped the lie, and now they're left choking on the dust of their own collapsed illusion. Number 8. They called it disrespect, but it was really you seeing what they feared. Calling someone disrespectful is the coward's way of saying you saw too much. That's exactly what they did to you. They needed a label for your resistance, so they twisted your discernment into rebellion. They said you had an attitude, that you didn't know your place, that you were dramatic or divisive. But let's be clear, what they feared wasn't your defiance, it was your clarity. You weren't rebellious, you were awake. You noticed what they spent years pretending not to see. You questioned the leaders they worshipped, the so-called pillars of the community who hid abuse and manipulation behind charm. You pointed out cracks in the foundation they called sacred, and instead of thanking you, they branded you a problem. Why? Because it's easier to vilify the truth-teller than to confront the lie. Imagine a room where everyone claps for a performance they know is fake. You're the one who stops clapping, who asks, "Why are we applauding this?" Suddenly, you're the villain, not because you were wrong, but because you broke the unspoken rule. Don't challenge what everyone else has agreed to ignore. You refused to laugh at what wasn't funny. You stopped sitting quietly in rooms where truth was strangled. You wouldn't kiss the ring, play the politics, or sell your soul for acceptance. That wasn't rebellion. That was your spirit rejecting what was counterfeit. And here's the part they couldn't admit. Your clarity made them confront their own cowardice. Because if you were right, that meant they weren't just victims of corruption, but participants. Your discernment exposed their complicity. So, they did the only thing weak people know how to do. They flipped the narrative and called you the threat. But look around now. The masks are cracking. The idols are falling. The truth you saw early is no longer hidden. And suddenly, the same people who once judged your resistance are wishing they had your vision. Your discernment was never disrespect. It was protection. It was foresight. It was survival. And now the ones who dismissed it as arrogance are choking on the reality that the problem was the only person telling the truth. Number 9. Your pain wasn't weakness. It was the mirror that judged them. Pain doesn't just shape the sufferer, it exposes the bystanders. That's the truth they never saw coming. Your suffering wasn't random, chosen one. It was a litmus test. While they enjoyed their illusion of peace, you were pushed into fire. You endured betrayal, isolation and injustice, while they sat silent, or worse, added weight to your back. They mistook your pain as weakness. They whispered that you were too sensitive, too dramatic, too broken. But in reality, your suffering was never just about you. It was revealing them. The way they treated you in your lowest moments became the clearest evidence of who they really were. Your suffering was the stage, but their reactions were the performance. Did they stand with you? Did they comfort you? Or did they gossip, turn their heads, and walk away? Every action was recorded. Every slight, every cold shoulder, every time they chose convenience over courage, it all became proof of their character. Imagine a courtroom where the evidence isn't written words, but memories. In that courtroom, their laughter at your pain plays back. Their silence when you cried out echoes. Their indifference becomes testimony. They thought their small betrayals meant nothing, but the universe was watching, documenting every choice, every gesture, every betrayal. And now, the very chaos you warned about is unfolding. The betrayals they defended are surfacing, the leaders they idolized are falling, and suddenly they're realizing the haunting truth. The way they treated you wasn't background noise. It was the loudest statement of all. You might ask, why me? Why did I have to be the one? Because your suffering was the test they couldn't pass. It wasn't wasted, it wasn't meaningless, it was preparation, yes, but it was also evidence. You became the mirror they couldn't hide from, the reflection of their hypocrisy. Now, as everything collapses around them, your survival stands as judgment. Your pain became the permanent record they can't erase. And when the dust settles, the measure of their hearts won't be how loud they cheered in comfort. It will be how they treated the one who was suffering. You didn't just survive, you became the undeniable evidence of their failure. Number 10. You didn't see the future, you exposed the script they were already trapped in. History doesn't repeat itself, it punishes those who refuse to learn. That's exactly what you revealed, chosen one. You weren't throwing around predictions like some fortune teller. You weren't guessing, you were exposing cycles. You saw the blueprint behind their lives, the hidden architecture that kept producing the same betrayals, the same scandals, the same broken outcomes. They thought you were warning them about isolated events, but you weren't pointing at surface chaos. You were unveiling the system underneath it. You saw the generational dysfunction passed down like a cursed inheritance. You noticed the emotional debts piling up behind their smiles. You recognized the psychological warfare hiding in their relationships. You weren't predicting a storm, you were showing them the weather pattern that had been there all along. Imagine watching someone step into the same trap over and over. You shout, "Stop, this is the same cycle." But they wave you off, saying, "This time it's different." Then the trap snaps shut again. That's what you lived through. You weren't crazy, you were early, and now they're living in the rerun of your warnings, watching everything unfold frame by frame. The irony is brutal. They thought life's chaos was random, just bad luck or normal drama. But you knew better. You saw the unhealed wounds shaping their choices. You saw how denial kept resetting the loop. You had the courage to name it, and that's why they turned on you, because to admit you were right would mean admitting the chaos wasn't fate, it was their own doing. Now the cycle has come full circle. The generational patterns they thought they escaped are chasing them down. The betrayals they defended are unraveling. The choices they made years ago are standing in front of them, demanding payment. And every crash, every collapse, every exposed lie is proof that you weren't predicting. You were reading the script they refused to acknowledge. Here's the brutal truth. You didn't break the cycle for them, but you exposed it. And now, as they choke on the consequences, they're realizing the sequel they're living through was written long before. You saw it, you named it, they ignored it, and now they're trapped inside the script you already read aloud. Number 11. You weren't meant to belong. You were placed to expose. Isolation isn't rejection, it's proof of assignment. That's the part they never understood. You were never designed to blend in, chosen one. You weren't meant to stitch yourself into the fabric of their fake unity. Your presence wasn't random, it was strategic. You were placed there not to conform, but to observe, to disrupt, to reflect the truth they kept running from. They mistook your detachment for arrogance. They said you were standoffish, too proud, too self-righteous. But your distance wasn't superiority, it was clarity. You didn't pull back because you thought you were better. You pulled back because you could see what they refused to admit. You weren't cold, you were awake. Imagine standing in a crowd where everyone's cheering at a crumbling building, celebrating its beauty, while you're the only one noticing the cracks in the foundation. That's why you couldn't clap along. That's why you couldn't blend in. You weren't there to play their social games. You were there as the witness, the mirror, the one assigned to call out what was rotting under the surface. And here's the truth they never wanted to face. Your detachment was their judgment. Your refusal to play along exposed the game. Your silence said more than their applause. Every time you pulled away from manipulation, corruption, or betrayal, you were holding up a mirror that screamed, "This isn't right." That made them hate you, not because you were wrong, but because you saw too clearly. Now the irony is unfolding. The truth you carried in your distance is playing out in real time. The chaos you saw from the start is crashing into their reality. The leaders they defended are exposed. The cracks you pointed out have split wide open, and suddenly your assignment is undeniable. They see it now. Your distance was never arrogance, it was foresight. Your refusal to blend in was proof you were set apart. You weren't there to belong, you were there to reveal, and now the very rejection they used against you has turned into vindication. You weren't socially accepted because you were never meant to be. You were strategically assigned, and now the truth of that assignment is being revealed. Number 12. Your silence wasn't surrender. It was the trap they walked into. Silence isn't weakness, it's the loudest weapon in a room full of noise. That's what they never grasped. When you stopped engaging, they mistook it for defeat. They thought you'd run out of words, that you were tired, intimidated, or crushed under the weight of their lies. But your silence wasn't fear, it was strategy. You weren't retreating, you were setting the stage. While they scrambled for attention, arguing, gossiping, spinning stories to keep their illusions alive, you chose a different path. You understood something they didn't, that time reveals more truth than any argument ever could. You knew the universe doesn't need your defense. It uses exposure as its own verdict. So instead of wasting your breath on people committed to misunderstanding you, you stepped back and let reality write the script. Imagine a courtroom where everyone is shouting, throwing accusations, trying to drown you out. Instead of screaming back, you sit still. You know the evidence is about to be revealed. That's what your silence was. It was the quiet confidence of someone who already knows how the story ends. And now, the unraveling has begun. The positions they boasted about are collapsing. The leaders they defended are exposed. The judgments they hurled at you are circling back like boomerangs. Suddenly, they see that the silence they mocked is louder than their applause ever was. Here's the sting. Your silence became the haunting echo in their minds. Every time they replay the lies they told, your quiet refusal to fight back hangs over them like a shadow. While they celebrated temporary victories, you were collecting permanent proof. While they screamed for validation, you let the truth sharpen itself in time's furnace. They thought you surrendered, But your silence was preparation. It was the waiting game. It was the confidence that you didn't need to shout to be right. You only needed to let life do the talking. Now the evidence is everywhere, and your silence is the only voice left standing. They called it weakness. They called it retreat. But it was the smartest strategy of all, because in the end, your silence didn't just survive the noise, it buried it. Number 13. You weren't the storm. You were the shelter they slammed the door on. They never feared the storm. They feared the one who warned them it was coming. That's the truth, chosen one. They painted you as the disturbance, the chaos, the danger that threatened their fragile little world. But they got it twisted. You weren't the storm. You were the shelter. You were the protection they should have embraced, the warning they should have prepared for, not the threat they ran from. They mistook your presence for disruption when in reality it was intervention. You didn't show up to destroy them, you showed up to wake them. You were the early thunder, the crack of lightning meant to shake them out of their comfort before the true destruction rolled in. But instead of rising to meet the truth, they hid. They chose comfort over confrontation, silence over courage, and illusion over preparation. Imagine ignoring the weather siren blaring before a tornado, plugging your ears, and blaming the siren for being loud. That's what they did with you. They thought dismissing you would keep the storm away, but storms don't disappear because you pretend they don't exist. They mistook your warning for danger when the real danger was their refusal to listen. And now, the chaos you tried to prepare them for is here. The betrayals are ripping through their homes. The secrets are flooding their communities. The lies they built their safety on are collapsing like houses without foundations. And in the rubble, the realization hits them. You weren't the enemy. You were the lifeline. Here's the irony that cuts the deepest. They thought rejecting you would save them. They thought silencing you would protect their fragile order. But in truth, by shutting out the one voice that carried clarity, they invited the full force of the storm. Justice remembers. Every time they chose convenience over conviction, every time they clung to illusions instead of truth, they sealed their fate. Now they're standing in the aftermath, soaked, broken, stunned, realizing the haunting reality. The storm wasn't you. The storm was their own denial. You weren't destruction, you were the shield, and by running from you, they ran straight into the very disaster you were sent to save them from. And so, chosen one, as the dust settles and the illusions collapse, one truth remains. You were never the problem, you were the proof. Every exile, every betrayal, every false label only confirmed what you carried inside. The whole community is shook now, not because you were loud, but because you were right. And now, the silence of your enemies is the loudest applause of all. If this message spoke to you, hit that like button, subscribe, drop the number 77 in the comments, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.